He posted a photo of a caviar breakfast on a yacht in Aurelia Cove, his ex's chin resting on his shoulder as if I didn't exist. "Just a business trip," he texted. I saw the five-star hotel bill on the company card. Double room, king bed. I didn't argue. Instead, I booked a 5:40 a.m. one-way flight. But before leaving, I would turn their jealousy trip into his career's funeral. Live from the shareholder meeting. My name is Mara Larkin. At 31, I am the head of compliance control for Blue Alder Capital, a position that essentially means I am the corporate priest to whom all sins are confessed, and the executioner who ensures they are punished. My world is one of regulations, firewalls, and the quiet, unyielding logic of numbers. It is a world I built to be impervious to the chaos of emotion, but chaos has a way of finding the smallest digital crack to seep through. It arrived on a Tuesday night, not as a storm, but as a whisper, a single, sterile notification that glowed on my phone's locked screen as I sat in the blue light of my silent apartment. "Aurelia Sunset Yacht tagged you in a post." My finger hovered over the alert. A tag from a charter company? I didn't follow them. Nolan must have used my handle by mistake. I swiped, and the image loaded, sharp and saturated with the golden hour light of a place far from my gray city skyline. And there he was, Nolan Pierce, my boyfriend of 3 years, the charismatic vice president of the fund, the man whose ambition I had mistaken for drive, stood on the polished deck of a gleaming white yacht. His arm was draped possessively around the shoulders of his ex-girlfriend, Celine Ward. Her head was tilted back, her chin resting on his shoulder with an intimacy that felt both ancient and shockingly new. Acclaimed staked and reclaimed. In their free hands, they held champagne flutes, clinking them together, not for a toast, but in a gesture aimed directly at the lens, at me. The salt spray seemed to crystallize in the air around them, a perfect, frozen moment of betrayal. Below the image, a caption, 2 words, slick with corporate nonchalance. "Work perk." And beneath that, a hashtag that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. Blue Alder, retreat. I knew every approved corporate event, every budget line for investor relations, every planned retreat down to the last canapé. There was no Blue Alder retreat. There was no budget code for Aurelia Cove. There was only this picture, a digital ghost story where I was the haunted. My phone buzzed again, a text from Nolan, the first volley of his defense. "Just entertaining clients. You're reading too much into it." I didn't reply. Emotion was a liability. Panic was an amateur's mistake. Instead, I moved from my couch to my desk, the hardwood floor cold beneath my bare feet. My personal laptop hummed to life, and I logged into Blue Alder's internal expense management system. My credentials gave me Tier 1 access, a master key to every financial door in the company. My fingers moved with the detached muscle memory of 1,000 audits. I typed Nolan's employee ID into the search field. His recent expense reports populated the screen, a neat, orderly ledger of his professional life, until the most recent one. The entry was pre-approved, filed just that morning. A charge for 5 nights at the Marigal Bay Hotel and Spa. My cursor hovered, then clicked. The folio opened, a PDF document as clean and sharp as a scalpel's edge. Suite 7B, Ocean View, 1 bed, a king. The charge was categorized under Investor Relations, a broad, often opaque category meant to cover dinners, travel, and entertainment for the fund's most valuable clients. The justification note was brief. Hosting prospective LP for Q4 fund. My training took over, the years of sniffing out fraud overriding the sting of personal injury. Who was the investor? I cross-referenced the approval timestamp with the official client meeting logs. Nothing, no scheduled meetings in Aurelia Cove, no new limited partner prospects on the books. I dug deeper into the expense report's metadata. The client being hosted was listed only by an email address, an anonymous Gmail account, created 3 days ago, a ghost, a lie so lazy it was insulting. With a series of clicks, I downloaded a certified copy of the hotel invoice to my secure drive. That's when I saw it. A small, innocuous line item at the bottom, listed under special requests, a note from the hotel concierge, digitally appended to the bill. Per Mr. Pierce's request, anniversary setup in suite upon arrival, chilled champagne and white roses. Anniversary, the word was a punch to the gut. Our anniversary was in October. His anniversary with Celine was this week. He hadn't forgotten. He had repurposed company funds to celebrate it. The phone buzzed a third time. Nolan again. His tone had shifted from dismissive to taunting. Get a little jealous. It's a good look on you. I stared at the glowing screen, at his words floating above a picture of my own face. He wanted a reaction. He wanted tears, accusations, a screaming match over the phone that would reinforce his narrative of the hysterical, untrusting girlfriend. He was trying to bait me into a game I had no intention of playing. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot of his text, then another of the one before it. I saved the yacht photo, stripping the metadata to preserve it as a clean file. I compiled the hotel receipt, the ghost email, the concierge's note. Each piece of digital evidence was saved, compressed, and moved into a newly created, encrypted folder on my personal drive. I named the folder Tide, because a tide comes in, cleans the shore, and pulls all the debris back out to sea. The hot, acidic burn of jealousy was there, a coil tightening in my stomach, but something colder and far more powerful was rising to meet it. It was the calm, methodical clarity of a compliance officer who had just found a smoking gun. In my mind, the swirling chaos of heartbreak began to settle, reorganizing itself not into a plan for revenge, but into the precise, unforgiving structure of an audit matrix. The variables weren't love and betrayal anymore. They were wire fraud, fiduciary misconduct, and violations of SEC regulations. The objective wasn't to win him back or even to make him hurt. It was to liquidate his career. My fingers flew across the keyboard again, this time on a different website, an airline. I searched for flights, not away from him, but toward the heart of the company he was defrauding. Destination: Rookford, the sleek, corporate city where Blue Alder Capital was publicly listed and where its board resided. Departure: the day after tomorrow. Landing just in time for the emergency shareholder meeting that had been called last week to address a minor Q3 earnings dip. A meeting Nolan was supposed to be chairing remotely. From his investor retreat, it was the perfect stage. I selected a one-way ticket. 5:40 a.m. The confirmation email arrived. A clean, final document. There would be no return flight, no path back to the life I had before that notification glowed in the dark. I stood up and walked to the bathroom, the laptop's glow shrinking behind me. I looked at my reflection in the large, frameless mirror. The woman staring back looked tired, but her eyes were clear, focused. The storm was contained. I picked up a pad of sticky notes and a black pen from the counter. I wrote 5 words, pressing the pen into the paper so hard it almost tore. I peeled the small yellow square off the pad and stuck it to the corner of the mirror, right next to my reflection. It was a memo to myself, a final compliance check before the most important audit of my life. Freedom doesn't need a return ticket. The day after I booked my flight, I walked into the Blue Alder Capital offices on the 45th floor of the Silver Strand Tower. The air inside was different from the city's chaos below. It was a carefully filtered atmosphere, smelling of reclaimed cedar, expensive leather, and the quiet, metallic scent of quarterly profits. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling glass, glinting off the chrome fixtures and polished marble floors, creating a cathedral of commerce where ambition was the only recognized god. Here, perception wasn't just reality, it was currency, and no one's currency was valued higher than Nolan Pierce's. He was hailed as the firm's young savior, after a series of conservative plays by the old guard had led to 2 quarters of stagnant growth. Nolan had swept in with an aggressive new strategy that seemed to be working miracles. The fund's value was climbing, investors were placated, and Nolan's name was whispered in the hallways with a reverence usually reserved for founding partners. He walked through the office like a conquering hero, his smile easy, his confidence radiating a heat that drew people in. He was the perfect picture of success. But on the dual monitors of my workstation, shielded from the gleaming hallway by the smoked glass of my office, a different picture was taking shape. My charts, a complex web of financial data points and trend lines, told a darker story. The firm's celebrated growth wasn't a miracle of market insight, it was a bubble, inflated by an anomalous surge in a single expenditure category: investor relations. Nolan's aggressive strategy was, in large part, an exercise in creative accounting. He was spending his way to success, and the numbers, when you knew how to listen, were screaming. I traced the surge back to its origin. It began 3 months ago, coinciding with the reappearance of a specific vendor in our system, Ward and Wave Events. The name was a clumsy attempt at subtlety. The proprietor was Celine Ward. She had done some freelance PR work for us years ago, a brief and unremarkable contract that had ended shortly after she and Nolan broke up. Now, she was back, this time with an open-ended events partnership agreement. The contract was reactivated on the same day the Aurelia Sunset Yacht Charter was booked. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a paper trail. The approval for the vendor contract and the initial wire transfer bore a digital signature: Nolan Pierce. That, in itself, wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the authorization line beneath it. On behalf of C. Holloway, CFO, a quick check of corporate travel logs confirmed our chief financial officer, Charles Holloway, had been on a flight to the London office for a series of legally mandated board meetings, according to Article 4, Section 3 of Blue Alder's corporate bylaws. A VP could not authorize expenditures over $50,000 on behalf of an executive officer without a digitally notarized temporary power of attorney. No such document existed. The signature was an invalid proxy. It was fraud, a small detail to most. But to a compliance officer, it was a foundational crack in the entire structure. Later that morning, I found him at the espresso machine in the communal kitchen, holding court with 2 junior analysts who were hanging on his every word about market volatility. I waited for them to scatter before I approached, my demeanor calm, my voice neutral. "Nolan," I said, retrieving a mug from the cupboard. "Just a heads up. The expense submission for IR-47 was miscategorized. It should have been filed under marketing, not client relations. It'll get flagged in the quarterly audit." He didn't even turn to look at me, focusing on the hiss of the steam wand. He laughed, a low, dismissive sound. "Don't be so meticulous, babe. It's all coming from the same pot. I'll handle it." He called me babe. In the office, he never did that. It wasn't a term of endearment. It was a pat on the head, a way to publicly place me back in the box labeled girlfriend, not head of compliance. As I walked back to my office, I heard the whispers. 2 women from the marketing team, their voices hushed but not hushed enough. "She's so lucky. He's brilliant, and he adores her." I offered them a tight, polite smile, the kind you learn to perfect in a corporate environment. They saw a power couple. I saw a man under active investigation, and the investigator he was sleeping with. My luck wasn't Nolan. My luck was the detailed, cross-referenced spreadsheet I had built that morning, a document that would soon be worth more than his entire career. Back in my office, I pulled up the internal compliance warning system, a confidential log where potential violations were flagged for review. I searched Nolan's name, my own initials. ML appeared next to 3 separate entries over the last 6 months. The first was for an undeclared gift from a vendor, a case of vintage wine. The second, a weekend trip to a ski lodge with a potential client, with expenses that far exceeded the approved per diem. The third was a pattern of unusually high entertainment receipts from restaurants known more for their atmosphere than their business clientele. Each time, I had flagged the issue. Each time, it had been reviewed by Nolan's direct superior and dismissed with the same annotation. Business development context justifies expenditure, flagged as noise. He wasn't just breaking the rules, he was being protected by a system that valued profits over ethics. My private messenger pinged. It was Arthur Vance, our head of legal, a man who survived in the corporate world by being meticulously neutral. Mara, a word of friendly advice, don't poke the wasp nest. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Arthur was warning me off, telling me to drop it. He knew Nolan was untouchable. My reply was short, coded in a language of defiance he would understand. Don't worry, Arthur, I brought my own smoke. For the rest of the afternoon, I built my map. It was a flowchart of financial malfeasance, stark and undeniable. The money flowed from the General Marketing Fund, a large pool of capital with discretionary oversight, into a series of payments to the newly created shell company, Ward and Wave Events. From there, the money was funneled to a corporate American Express black card, the same card used to book the yacht, the hotel, the spa treatments, the private car service. It was a classic money laundering scheme, just executed with corporate funds instead of drug money. He was washing the company's money to pay for his affair. The final, damning piece of evidence fell into my lap by pure chance, a product of his own breathtaking arrogance. At 4:15 p.m., an email notification popped up from the General Office Announcements listserv, a communal inbox that received everything from HR updates to lost and found notices. Someone had replied all to a company-wide memo. The subject line was innocuous. FW, Floral Arrangement Delivery. I opened it. It was from Nolan's executive account. He had clearly intended to forward it to his assistant, but in his haste, had sent it to the entire firm. Attached was a receipt from a high-end florist in Aurelia Cove for 24 white roses, the same flowers mentioned in the hotel's concierge note, but it was the message, intended for the small card to be included with the bouquet, that sealed his fate. It was typed out in the body of the email for all of Blue Alder Capital to see. For Celine, happy second chance. That night, my apartment was no longer a home. It was a command center. The city lights outside blurred into an irrelevant backdrop. My focus was entirely on the glowing rectangle of my monitor and on a single, password-protected folder named Tide. I entered the 64-character alphanumeric passphrase, and the vault opened. It wasn't a collection of angry screenshots. It was a meticulously organized digital dossier, an armory of facts. Inside were subfolders containing the hotel invoices, the raw metadata from the yacht photograph, server logs I had requested from IT, showing the yacht's Wi-Fi usage syncing with Nolan's corporate devices, and a complete transaction history of the corporate card, including its real-time GPS location data. This was my real battleground, not in text messages or tearful phone calls, but in the clean, brutal language of data. My first move was to cross-reference two pieces of information: the GPS pings from Nolan's company-issued phone and the official investor meeting calendar he had submitted. On one half of my screen, I pulled up a map of Aurelia Cove, plotting the address of the fictional office building where he was supposedly meeting the phantom investor. On the other half, I displayed the live GPS data from the phone. The 2 points were separated by a glaring, unbridgeable gap of 27 miles. His phone, which he was required to have on him for business purposes, was not at a sterile corporate park. It was pinging consistently from a single, stationary location, the Aurelia Sunset Yacht Marina. The lie was no longer an accusation. It was a set of geographic coordinates. Next, I moved to the contract for Ward and Wave Events. I had seen hundreds of vendor agreements, and this one immediately felt wrong. It was thin, lacking the standard boilerplate language for indemnification and liability. It was a flimsy facade, built to move money, not to provide a service. I scanned the terms and conditions, my eyes searching for the tells. I found one in Section 4B, a cancellation clause. Standard contracts might have a 10 to 15% fee for a last-minute cancellation. This one contained an exorbitant no-show penalty of 40% of the total contract value, payable within 2 business days. It was a classic red flag for a kickback scheme. They could fabricate a cancellation, invoice the firm for the penalty, and pocket a substantial sum of clean authorized cash. It was designed for a quick, untraceable extraction of funds. Who owned this company? A simple public record search of the business registration number listed on the contract gave me the answer. The sole proprietor and legal representative for Ward and Wave Events was a woman named Eleanor Ward. A quick social media search confirmed my suspicion. On Celine Ward's public profile, amongst photos of brunches and fashion events, was a picture from 2 years ago captioned, "Happy birthday to the best mom in the world, Eleanor Ward." He hadn't even bothered to hide it behind a layer of anonymity. He had registered the shell company in the name of his mistress's mother. It was arrogant, sloppy, and it was going to cost him everything. As I dug deeper into the shared corporate drive where the contract was stored, I found something else, something he thought was buried. A file history log revealed a second document had been uploaded, then quickly replaced. I ran a data recovery protocol on that specific server sector. After a few tense minutes, a ghost file materialized. It was an addendum to the original contract, uploaded at 2:12 a.m. 2 nights prior. This document secretly amended the initial agreement, increasing the project deposit from $20,000 to a staggering $180,000, citing expanded logistical requirements. At the bottom was the required authorizing signature from the CFO, Charles Holloway. But it was a poor forgery. I zoomed in on the pixelated signature. It was a scanned image, not a secure digital signature, and it was tilted at a slight, unnatural 2-degree angle. The pressure and stroke were inconsistent with Charles's verified signatures on file. It was a crude cut-and-paste job, a forgery so blatant it was like a signed confession. With this final piece, the entire timeline of the fraud snapped into sharp focus. I created a new document, a 72-hour chronology of the crime. Hour 0, 9:00 a.m. Nolan submits the initial expense request for the Marigal Bay Hotel. Hour 4, 1:00 p.m. The fraudulent Ward and Wave contract is approved using the Invalid CFO proxy. Hour 28, 1:00 p.m. The forged addendum is uploaded at 2:12 a.m. The $180,000 wire transfer is initiated. Hour 52, 5 p.m. The Aurelia Sunset Yacht photo is posted to social media. Hour 60, 1:00 a.m. The corporate card is charged for a sea salt and stone couples retreat at the Marigal Bay Spa. The narrative was complete, concise, and damning. Now, it was time to set the trap. I returned to Blue Alder's internal compliance portal. My actions from this point forward would be logged, time-stamped, and legally unimpeachable. I drafted a formal source of expenditure verification request, citing the IR-47 Investor Relations category. I addressed it directly to our CFO, Charles Holloway, with a carbon copy sent to his executive assistant. The request was clinical and devoid of emotion, simply asking for verification that the listed Gmail account was a legitimate prospective investor and that he had personally authorized the wire transfer to Ward and Wave Events. Sending the request through the official internal channel triggered an automated, non-revocable legal timestamp. The clock had started. Next, I compiled my findings: the GPS discrepancy, the shell company details, the forged addendum, the timeline, into a concise, 10-page report. I titled it, Preliminary Review of Q3, Investor Relations Expenditure Anomalies, IR-47. I uploaded it to the Audit Committee's secure digital boardroom, a virtual space accessible only by the 3 independent board members tasked with oversight. The report was locked with a one-time use cryptographic key. I sent the key to the committee chair in a separate, encrypted message with a note. Confidential briefing. Key expires in 24 hours. This created a sense of urgency and ensured the information couldn't be disseminated or ignored. My third move was to go on the offensive. I opened the shared corporate calendar for the upcoming annual general meeting in Rookford. As an employee shareholder, I had the right to add items to the open Q&A agenda. I added a new entry, flagging it as a matter of urgent fiscal concern. Shareholder inquiry. A formal request for clarification on the unbudgeted surge in IR expenditures, specifically transaction code IR47. Nolan's vacation was now an official item on the AGM agenda. The wasps were now officially poked. The final piece of the trap was the most elegant. It was a small, overlooked clause in the company's governance protocols, a bylaw I had practically memorized. It stated that if a formal expenditure verification request made by the head of compliance to a C-level executive went unanswered for more than 48 business hours, the head of compliance was not only permitted, but required, to bypass the standard chain of command and report their findings directly to the chairman of the board. Charles Holloway was in London, tied up in meetings and dealing with a different time zone. Nolan had counted on his absence to provide cover. I was now weaponizing that same absence. The 48-hour clock on my request to the CFO would expire at 9:00 a.m. on the morning of the shareholder meeting. When he inevitably failed to respond in time, the system itself would grant me the authority to light the fuse. The trap wasn't just set, it was automated. All I had to do now was wait for them to walk right into it. The call came just as I was archiving the forged addendum. Nolan's name flashed on my screen, and I let it ring 3 times before answering. Putting the call on speakerphone, I wanted my hands free. The sound that filled my silent apartment was not of an office or a hotel room, but the open-air ambience of the sea, a faint, whipping wind, the distant cry of a gull, the low thrum of a boat's engine. He was still on the yacht. He was calling me from the scene of the crime. "Mara," he began, his voice smooth, practiced, the voice he used on nervous investors. "I have a feeling you're blowing things out of proportion. We need to talk about this like adults." "I'm listening," I said. My voice was a flat line. "Look, I know how that picture looks, but you and we're a team. You know the pressure I'm under to perform this quarter. You can't let a little thing like this derail everything we've been working towards." The word team hung in the air, a grotesque distortion of what we had been. He was trying to invoke our shared history, our partnership, as a shield for his betrayal. I looked at the encrypted folder on my screen, the arsenal of evidence I had assembled against him. "A team," I replied, my voice as cold and clear as the ice water in the glass on my desk, "doesn't use a corporate credit card to celebrate a second-chance anniversary with an ex-girlfriend." The sound of the wind on his end was the only reply for a long moment. The mask of calm had slipped. When he spoke again, his tone was different, sharper. The friendly CEO was gone, replaced by the cornered executive. "This is strategy. Mara, you think in black and white, but this business is all gray. Celine has connections. Her father is on the board of 3 different pension funds we've been trying to get in front of for a year. She's helping us. This is a networking opportunity." It was a plausible lie, a well-constructed one. To anyone else, it might have been enough to create reasonable doubt. But he had made a critical error. He underestimated my diligence. While he was talking, my fingers were already moving. I opened the file containing the hotel folio, located the link to the hotel's private dining services, and found the specific menu that matched the charge on his receipt. I took a clean screenshot. It was an image of the menu's header, elegantly scripted. "The Marigal Bay Anniversary Tasting for 2. I attached it to a new text message and sent it to him. On my computer screen, I could see the delivery receipt. Then, a second later, the status changed. "Read." There was no reply, just the cold, blue finality of that single word. "Seen." I had presented my evidence, and he had no counter-argument. The silence that followed was his confession. A few minutes later, my phone lit up with a notification from a different number. It was Celine. Her message was a masterclass in condescending pity. "Hey Mara, Nolan told me you're a little upset. It's cute that you're so protective of him, but this is way above your pay grade. Don't ruin a brilliant man's future over a little professional jealousy. Some of us are trying to build empires here." The audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't just the other woman. She was casting herself as the business partner and me as the emotional, irrational girlfriend. She thought this was a competition for Nolan. She had no idea the game had changed. I didn't reply with anger. I didn't reply with accusations. I replied with a direct link to the Blue Alder Capital Corporate Governance Bylaws. Section 7. Subsection C. Misappropriation of corporate funds for personal use or gain. I highlighted the relevant passage. A Level 2 violation, resulting in immediate termination for cause, forfeiture of all unvested stock options, and a mandatory clawback of all performance-based bonuses issued within the preceding 18 months. I added a single sentence beneath the link. As head of compliance, I just thought you, as a partner, should be aware of the potential liabilities involved in your empire building. The response this time was not silence. My phone began to ring again. Nolan's name flashing insistently. I ignored it. It rang again. I declined the call. Then came the text message. All pretense of control gone. It was just raw, impotent rage. You will regret this. I took a screenshot. I opened a new document in my Tide folder, a log of all communications. I typed, October 16th, 2214, verbal threat received via text message from Nolan Pierce following presentation of evidence of malfeasance. The act of typing it, of clinically documenting his threat, drained it of its power over me. It was no longer a personal attack. It was just another piece of evidence. The next morning, the company's retaliation began. It was subtle, cloaked in the language of corporate procedure. I received an automated email from Human Resources. My semi-annual performance review, originally scheduled for next month, had been moved. The new date was tomorrow morning, at 10:00 a.m., the exact same time the annual general meeting was scheduled to begin. It was a transparent, petty maneuver. They were trying to sideline me, to bury me in a meaningless bureaucratic procedure in a small conference room, while the real decisions were being made in the grand hall. They wanted to ensure I wouldn't be present when the agenda item I had submitted came up. They thought they were trapping me. A slow smile spread across my face. It was the first time I had smiled in 2 days. They hadn't trapped me. They had handed me the perfect justification. My absence from a mandatory performance review would be noted. My presence at the shareholder meeting, exercising my rights as an employee shareholder to question the board on a matter of fiscal urgency I had formally placed on the agenda, was not just defensible, it was my duty. They had intended to put me in a cage, but they had inadvertently opened the door to the arena and handed me a microphone. I stood up from my desk and walked to the printer. I opened the confirmation email from the airline, the one with my one-way ticket to Rookford. I printed a single copy. The paper was still warm as I carried it back to my desk. I opened the heavy-duty binder where I kept the hard copies of all my evidence, the printed bank statements, the forged contract, the communication log. I slipped the single sheet of paper, with its bold, clear flight information and its stark, one-way designation, right on top. It was a cover sheet. It was a mission statement. It was a constant, physical reminder of the endgame. This wasn't about fighting for my place at Blue Alder Capital. It was about executing a plan that had no path back. The flight to Rookford was a sterile transition between two worlds. I didn't sleep. I reviewed my files on a privacy-screened laptop. The cabin lights dim around me. The hum of the engines a monotonous soundtrack to my focus. When I landed, the air was crisp and cool. The city a monument of steel and glass reflecting a gray, overcast sky. It was the perfect weather for a funeral. I didn't go to the apartment I still shared with Nolan. My first stop was the Halcyon Hotel, a boutique establishment whose understated luxury was in stark contrast to the ostentatious grandeur of the Rookford Grand across the street, where the shareholder meeting would take place. I had booked a small business suite on the 7th floor, one with a direct, unobstructed view of the Grand's main entrance. I registered the room under a corporate pseudonym I kept for sensitive investigations. The Calm Water Project. The room itself, I decided, would be my war room. The Calm Water Room. Inside, I didn't unpack my small suitcase. Instead, I began to set up my props. First, I cleared the mahogany conference table. From my briefcase, I produced a series of large foam core boards. Upon them, I began to pin my evidence, transforming the digital trail into a physical, undeniable narrative. The 72-hour timeline became the centerpiece, a stark, linear progression of the crime. To its left, I pinned the printouts of the money trail. The flowchart from the marketing fund to Ward and Wave events, to the American Express card. To its right, the forged contract and its fraudulent addendum, the skewed, pixelated signature of the CFO circled in red ink. Then, I turned to the room's built-in audio-visual system. I connected my laptop to the large flat-screen monitor on the wall, partitioning the display into 3 vertical windows. The first window ran a continuous loop of the GPS tracking data, showing Nolan's company phone anchored at the Aurelia Marina, 27 miles away from his stated business location. The second window displayed the Ward and Wave events contract, its dubious 40% cancellation clause highlighted. The third, and most damning, was a simple, looping slideshow of images. The yacht photo, the hotel receipt with the anniversary setup note, the spa bill for the couple's retreat, and the final, catastrophic email with the subject line, "Happy second chance." The room was no longer a hotel suite. It was a museum of his downfall. At precisely 7:00 a.m., there was a soft knock on the door. My first strategic strike was about to commence. I had scheduled a pre-meeting with Alistair Finch and Brenda Vance, 2 notoriously sharp-tongued minority shareholders who, between them, controlled a small but vocal 7% of the company. They were legacy investors, fiercely protective of the firm's old-guard reputation for fiscal prudence, and they despised Nolan's flashy high-spend approach. I had sent them a cryptic invitation the day before, promising materially significant information regarding Q3 expenditure overruns. They entered the room, skeptical and impatient. Alistair, a man in his late 60s with eyes that had seen a dozen market crashes, surveyed my evidence wall with a deep frown. Brenda, a former prosecutor, ignored the display entirely and fixed her gaze on me. "This had better be worth missing my breakfast, Larkin." I didn't give them a presentation. I let them walk the room. I simply stood by the timeline and answered their questions. I pointed to the invalid proxy signature. I explained the shell company registered to Celine's mother. I played the GPS data loop. For 15 minutes, they were silent, moving from one piece of evidence to the next. It was Brenda who spoke first, her finger tapping the forged addendum. "This is a wire fraud felony, plain and simple." Alistair turned to me, his initial skepticism replaced by a cold fury. "He used shareholder money for a romantic getaway with his ex? What do you need from us?" "I need you to ask the right questions," I said. "When my agenda item comes up, I need you to demand a full, unredacted display of the IR-47 transaction log. The board can dismiss me. They cannot dismiss you." They both nodded, a grim understanding passing between them. They were no longer just shareholders. They were my allies. The bait was set. After they left, I executed my next move. I had compiled a complete, hard-copy version of the Tide folder into a thick, spiral-bound volume. It was my evidence package. I placed it in a large, tamper-proof courier envelope, sealed it with wax, and called for a bonded messenger service. The destination was the office of the Secretary of the Board of Directors, located on the top floor of the Rookford Grand. The instructions were explicit. Obtain a signed and time-stamped receipt of delivery. At 8:30 a.m., a notification appeared on my phone. A PDF copy of the receipt. The package had been delivered. The board was now legally in possession of the evidence. Whether they had opened it or not, ignorance was no longer a plausible defense. I had already registered to speak during the open Q&A session, as was my right under the employee shareholder provisions. My entire case had to be made in the time allotted to a single question. I had rehearsed my summary until it was stripped of all emotion. Every word a polished, sharpened weapon. 90 seconds. That's all I would have. I recited it to my reflection in the dark hotel window. My question pertains to the material inflation of the investor relations budget, specifically the expenditure coded IR-47. I request the board confirm if they are aware this line item was used to fund a non-business related trip for a senior executive and his romantic partner, facilitated through a shell corporation owned by the partner's mother, and authorized via a forged C-level signature on a fraudulent contract addendum totaling $180,000. Each phrase was a drill bit, designed to pierce the corporate armor of plausible deniability. The next piece of the plan involved the court of public opinion. I used a burner phone and a voice modulator to place a call to Julian Thorne, the most dogged investigative financial reporter at the North Ledger. I introduced myself as a concerned Blue Alder shareholder. I explained I had a story about executive malfeasance, backed by incontrovertible proof. I sent him a link to a secure, anonymous file-sharing site where I had uploaded a redacted version of my report. My one condition was absolute, a publication embargo until precisely 10:15 a.m. "You'll know when it's time," I told him. "You'll hear the explosion from your office." He agreed. The press was primed. Then came the failsafe, the move that would ensure this fire could not be extinguished behind closed doors. I logged into a secure email service and composed a message to the public tip line of the State Securities and Exchange Commission. The subject was formal whistleblower complaint, suspected wire fraud and fiduciary duty violations at Blue Alder Capital, BLU. I attached the complete, unredacted Tide folder as a zip file. Then, I used the service's scheduling feature. I set the email to be sent not at a specific time, but upon receipt of a trigger phrase sent from my primary phone. The phrase was, "Activate Article 14." It was my dead man's switch. The moment I uttered those words on the floor of the AGM, the evidence would be in the hands of federal regulators. My final act of preparation was to secure the data. I logged into a notarized digital archiving service, a virtual vault that provides a legally recognized, time-stamped record of a file's existence and contents at a specific moment. I uploaded the entire Tide folder one last time, for the password, the final key to lock away the evidence of Nolan's ruin. I typed 2 words, freedom one way. With all the pieces in place, I walked to the window. Across the street, black town cars were beginning to pull up to the entrance of the Rookford Grand, disgorging men and women in dark suits. The shareholders were arriving. I looked at the clock. It was 9:15 a.m. In my binder. My one-way ticket for 5:40 a.m. the next morning felt cool and final against my fingertips. I had allocated just enough time for the storm I had so carefully engineered to make landfall, and for me to vanish in the chaos. The ballroom of the Rookford Grand was an exercise in calculated opulence. The light from the recessed fixtures was a cold, bluish white, the kind that makes diamonds look brighter and human skin look paler. It glinted off the silver water pitchers and the polished buttons on the dark suits of the shareholders. The air was cold, smelling of industrial-grade coffee and shareholder anxiety. On the massive LED screen behind the stage, a graph depicted a hockey stick of stable growth, a term that, in my line of work, is often a synonym for creative accounting. And at the podium, bathed in the glow of that manufactured success, was Nolan Pierce. He was in his element, his voice resonating with a carefully rehearsed confidence. He spoke of synergy, of disruptive strategies, of a bold new vision for Blue Alder Capital. He was charming, convincing, a portrait of unearned confidence, and he was, I knew, delivering the final performance of his career. In the third row, I saw her, Celine Ward. She wasn't an employee or a shareholder, but she sat there as if she owned the room, dressed in a jade green silk blouse, the color of money and envy. She wasn't watching Nolan. She was scanning the audience, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. It was the smile of a woman who believed she had won. She had the man, the lifestyle, the victory. She was watching a future unfold that she thought she had secured. I remained standing in the back, a ghost in a simple black dress, my presence unnoticed and unremarkable. I waited. Nolan concluded his presentation to a round of polite, if unenthusiastic, applause. The chairman of the board, a stoic man named Marcus Thorne, stepped up to the smaller lectern to moderate the Q&A. "The floor is now open for questions," he announced. This was the moment. I took a steadying breath and stepped forward to the microphone stand in the center aisle. A technician adjusted it for my height. The small movements felt momentous. Each click and rustle amplified in the tense silence. Heads turned. "My name is Mara Larkin, head of compliance control for this firm," I said, my voice clear and even, carrying through the ballroom's speaker system. "I have a question for Mr. Pierce and the board." Nolan's smile tightened at the corners. He saw me now. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a final, silent warning. I ignored it. "My question pertains to the material inflation of the investor relations budget during the third quarter. Specifically, the expenditure report coded IR47 for the week of the supposed Aurelia investor outreach. Could you please display the detailed transaction log for that report on the main screen?" A nervous energy rippled through the room. This was not a question about market projections. This was internal. This was dirty laundry. The chairman looked to the technicians, then back at me. "Ms. Larkin, this is perhaps a matter for an internal—" "With all due respect, Mr. Chairman," I interrupted, a move of calculated audacity. "This expenditure directly impacts the Q3 earnings report being presented today. It is materially relevant to every shareholder in this room." Alistair Finch and Brenda Vance, my shareholder allies, immediately voiced their assent from the front rows. Cornered. The chairman nodded curtly to the tech booth. "Show the report." The growth chart vanished, replaced by a dense spreadsheet of numbers and codes. Nolan squinted at it, preparing his defense. "As you can see," he began, "these are standard T&E expenses for a critical—" "That won't be necessary," I cut in. "To simplify things for everyone, I've prepared a summary. If the technicians would please follow the public link I'm sending to the main display now." On my phone, I hit send. The screen behind Nolan flickered, and the spreadsheet was replaced by a single, large QR code. A new murmur spread. Phones were raised all over the ballroom, small windows of light in the dim hall. As they scanned the code, their own screens lit up with the contents of my war room, the contents of the Tide folder. A timeline, stark and brutal, filled the main screen. The sequence of events was laid bare for hundreds of eyes to see. The 2:12 a.m. timestamp on the forged contract addendum, the wire transfer for $180,000, the hotel bill, the spa receipt, with the words, "Sea Salt and Stone Couples Retreat," now appearing 60 feet wide. I raised my voice to be heard over the growing whispers. "I would like to draw the board's attention to the corporate bylaws. Article 7, Section 3. Any officer found to have willfully misappropriated corporate funds for personal use or gain will be subject to immediate termination for cause, and the matter will be reported to the relevant regulatory authorities." Nolan's face was pale, a sheen of sweat on his brow. The confident speaker was gone. He grabbed the microphone, his knuckles white. He shouted the word, his voice cracking with panic. "Fabrication! This is a fabrication! This is a baseless, personal attack by a disgruntled employee." "Is it?" I asked calmly. My voice was a blade. "Let's look at the metadata from the yacht photograph you so helpfully tagged me in." I sent a second link. The screen split. On one side was the Instagram post, the picture of him and Celine, champagne glasses glinting. On the other side was a map of Aurelia Cove. A red dot glowed over the marina. The photo's embedded geotag places it here. A second dot, this one blue, appeared on the map, pulsing over the exact same location. And the GPS data from your company-issued credit card, at the exact time the photo was taken, places it here. They are the same. This wasn't a meeting. It was a vacation you paid for with shareholder money. The murmur erupted into a roar of conversation. The corporate decorum was shattered. Nolan stood frozen, speechless, exposed under the harsh white lights. The chairman's voice cut through the chaos like a shard of glass. "Silence! This presentation is suspended." But it was Celine who made the final, fatal error. She shot to her feet, her face flushed with fury, her voice shrill. "This is ridiculous! That was a legitimate business expense. It was my work. My company was contracted for that event. I looked at her, my expression unreadable. Your company? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. Ward and Wave Events, I presume? I sent my final link. A new document replaced the GPS map on the screen. The Articles of Incorporation for Ward and Wave Events. The name of the sole legal representative was highlighted in a damning shade of yellow for the entire room to see. Eleanor Ward. Could you please confirm for the shareholders? I asked, my eyes locked on Celine. That Eleanor Ward is, in fact, your mother? Celine froze, her mouth half open, the blood draining from her face. The victorious smile was gone, replaced by the slack-jawed horror of total defeat. She was no longer the winner. She was just the accomplice. The chairman of the board didn't need to see any more. He picked up the small wooden gavel at his lectern. It struck the block. The sound was a gunshot in the suddenly silent room. This meeting is moving to a closed-door disciplinary session, effective immediately. Mr. Pierce, you are suspended, pending a full and immediate investigation. Nolan stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. He had wanted to make me jealous. I had made him irrelevant. I looked down at my watch. The numbers on the screen glowed. 10:15 a.m. My email. My dead man's switch had just left the outbox. The evidence was now in the hands of the SEC. The first gavel had fallen in the boardroom. The second was about to fall in a federal office. The chaos that erupted in the ballroom was not loud, but it was absolute. It was the quiet, frantic chaos of wealth in peril. Shareholders were being ushered out by security, their hushed, angry questions filling the air. The board members had huddled together on the stage, a tight knot of dark suits and grim faces. And at the center of the wreckage, Nolan stood alone at the podium, a captain on a ship that had already sunk. The chairman, Marcus Thorne, did not wait for the room to clear. He signaled to the head of the audit committee, a formidable woman named Eleanor Vance. She stepped forward, holding a tablet, her face impassive, a judge about to read a sentence. Pursuant to the evidence presented and an emergency vote of the committee, she announced, her voice amplified by the still active microphone, cutting through the murmurs. We are activating the malice and clawback provision of Mr. Pierce's executive compensation agreement. She paused, letting the legalistic terms land like blows. All unvested stock options are hereby rescinded. Furthermore, the company will seek the immediate return of all performance-based bonuses paid to Mr. Pierce within the last 18 months. The total amount to be reclaimed is estimated at $2.4 million. A collective gasp went through the remaining staff and junior executives. It was a financial execution, performed in public. At that moment, a side door to the stage burst open and Charles Holloway, the CFO, finally appeared. He was red-faced, his tie askew, clearly having rushed from the airport. "Marcus, what in God's name is happening? My phone has been—" He stopped short as he took in the scene, the terrified faces, the board's grim tableau, and Nolan's ashen expression. The chairman simply picked up a document from his lectern and handed it to him. It was the signed, time-stamped receipt for the evidence package I had couriered that morning. Charles stared at it, his face losing its color. He saw the sender, Mara Larkin. He saw the delivery time, 8:30 a.m. He understood instantly. He hadn't been absent. He had been rendered irrelevant hours before he even landed. I hadn't just gone around him. I had built a legal case on the foundation of his absence. Then came a new sound, a low hum that grew in intensity. It was the collective vibration of 200 smartphones receiving the same news alert, heads bowed down to screens, and a new wave of whispers, more venomous this time, swept the room. I glanced at my own phone. The North Ledger article was live. The headline was a masterpiece of brutal simplicity. Blue Alder VP's luxury anniversary trip with X was funded by shareholders. Documents allege Julian Thorne had not missed his deadline. The internal crisis was now a public spectacle. Nolan's phone began to vibrate violently against the wooden podium. A frantic, buzzing death rattle, the company's general counsel, Arthur Vance, the man who had warned me not to poke the wasps, rushed to his side. He began whispering urgently in Nolan's ear, but he was too close to the lectern microphone. His frantic advice was broadcast to the entire room, a chilling echo in the silent chaos. They have everything. They filed with the SEC. Nolan, it's over. The SEC will be asking questions by noon. That was my cue. The final act. I walked from the back of the room, my footsteps quiet on the thick carpet, and approached the stage. I held a single, folded piece of paper in my hand. I addressed the chairman directly, my voice steady. Mr. Thorne, please accept my formal resignation from Blue Alder Capital, effective immediately. I placed the letter on the lectern. I am invoking the constructive discharge clause of my employment agreement on the grounds of a sustained and hostile work environment fostered by executive malfeasance, a direct violation of the company's stated code of ethics. It wasn't a retreat. It was a final tactical move, framing my departure under the protections afforded a whistleblower. I would be compensated for my silence and my exit. The chairman looked at me, his expression unreadable. For the first time, there was a flicker of something other than anger in his eyes, perhaps a sliver of respect. Larkin, he said, his voice low, you've done this firm a service today. However brutal the method, there is a place for you here, a much more senior one, if you want it. It was the offer I expected, the reward for a successful coup, but I had no desire to rule the kingdom I had just cleansed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. But I only came here to close this door. He held my gaze for a second longer, then gave a single, sharp nod of acceptance. He turned back to face what was left of his company. He picked up his gavel again. The sound cracked through the air a second time, heavier, more final. The board hereby appoints Eleanor Vance as interim vice president of the fund. Furthermore, we are retaining the services of an outside counsel to conduct a full, independent investigation into this matter. This session is adjourned. As I turned to leave, he was there, blocking my path. Nolan. His face was a collapsed ruin of the handsome, confident man who had stood at that podium an hour ago. All the charm had been stripped away, leaving only a raw, ugly core of rage and self-pity. You destroyed me, he rasped, his voice a ragged whisper. I looked at him, not at his eyes, but at the expensive fountain pen still clipped to the pocket of his suit jacket, the pen he used to sign everything. You signed the receipts, Nolan, I said quietly. There was nothing else to say. I stepped around him. My eyes scanned the room one last time and found Celine. She was no longer in the third row. She was near the exit, half hidden behind a velvet curtain. She was trying to shrink, to become invisible. Her expensive jade blouse now looked garish under the harsh house lights. Her high heels, which had clicked with such purpose when she entered, seemed to snag on the deep pile of the carpet as she took a clumsy step backward into the shadows. The spotlight of victory had shifted, and it had washed the color from her face, leaving behind only the pale, cheap residue of her ambition. I didn't take the main exit. I had no desire to walk through the gauntlet of shocked faces and ringing phones. Instead, I found a side door, a service exit used by the hotel staff. It opened into a narrow, concrete corridor and then out into the gray Rookford afternoon. The wind whipped down the canyon of skyscrapers, carrying the smell of approaching rain and the sharp, metallic tang of new construction. It was the scent of a city in constant flux, of things being torn down and rebuilt, the scent of severance. I was free. The walk back across the street to the Halcyon Hotel was like crossing a border into a different country. The world I left behind in the Rookford Grand was a maelstrom of ringing phones, panicked executives, and the bright, hungry flash of camera phones capturing the fallout. The world I entered was the quiet, carpeted stillness of the 7th-floor hallway. I slid the keycard into the lock of the calm water room, and the soft click of the latch felt like a seal being broken, a seal on a life I was about to dismantle. Inside, The war room was exactly as I had left it. The evidence boards still stood as silent witnesses, the tripartite screen on the wall still looping its silent testimony of GPS coordinates and forged contracts. The storm had passed. The battle was won. And now it was time to strike the set. This was not a celebration. It was a ceremony of erasure, a ritual of becoming a ghost. My first act was digital. I sat at the mahogany table, the seat still warm from my pre-dawn preparations, and opened my laptop. My fingers moved with a calm, practiced efficiency. First, I accessed the public link I had created for the QR code. I deleted the shared folder. Severing the link, the hundreds of phones in that ballroom would now lead to a dead end, a 404 error. The evidence had served its purpose, now it would vanish. Next, I opened the encrypted Tide folder. This was my archive, my truth. I did not delete it. I fortified it. I applied a final cryptographic seal, locking the folder with a permanent digital certificate. It was now a time capsule, unalterable and absolute, a digital record that could be verified in a court of law, but never again opened by me. I no longer needed to look at it. I had internalized its contents. My final act as an employee of Blue Alder Capital was to log into my corporate email account one last time. I created a new rule in the mail client. Any incoming email, from this moment forward, was to be automatically and silently forwarded to a dedicated inbox at a third-party corporate governance watchdog I had a confidential relationship with. It was an insurance policy, ensuring any attempts at communication, threats, or further incriminating evidence would be captured by an impartial observer. Once the rule was saved, I navigated to the account settings. I found the button I was looking for. Deactivate account. A small box popped up. Are you sure? This action is irreversible. I clicked yes. A spinning wheel. And then the screen went blank. My digital ghost had left the machine. With the online world sanitized, I turned to the physical. I walked to the evidence boards and one by one began to pull the pins from the documents. The timeline, the money trail, the forged signature circled in red. I gathered them all into a neat stack. I did not shred them. I placed them back into the thick binder, the one my one-way ticket was still clipped to. This was the master file, the original sin. It would travel with me, not as a reminder, but as the foundation of my new life, the price of my own buyout, when the boards were bare, a landscape of blank white foam. I took out my phone and snapped a single picture of the empty display, a clean slate. I walked to the door and slid the chain lock into place. Only then did I open my suitcase on the bed. It was a small, carry-on-sized case, containing a life stripped down to its essentials. There were 3 identical, perfectly folded white linen shirts, a single pair of dark trousers, a new, unopened leather-bound journal, and a pen. My passport, and the binder. That was it. I was not packing for a destination. I was packing for a departure. Before closing the case, I took a piece of the hotel stationery and my pen. I didn't write a long, cathartic letter. There was no one to send it to. I wrote a memo to the only person whose opinion now mattered. Myself. 5 words. A command for the weak moments I knew might come in the lonely days ahead. Do not text him back. I folded the paper in half and tucked it into the front pocket of my journal. It was not a keepsake. It was a standing order. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the contacts. I scrolled to the entry for Dad. My father. A quiet man living in the quiet, fictional town of Gray Hollow was the only anchor I had left. I typed a short, simple text, designed to inform without alarming. Going to be busy with a big project for a while. Off the grid. Don't worry if you don't hear from me. I'm okay. Love you. I hit send before I could second-guess it. Then, the hardest part of the ritual, I opened my photo gallery. For 3 years, it had been a shared digital life. Us at a winery, us on a ski lift, us smiling in the bright, deceptive sunlight of a dozen perfect moments. My thumb was merciless. I selected the first picture, then scrolled, my finger pressing down. a blue checkmark appearing over every image that contained his face, his smile, his ghost. I didn't do it to forget. I did it because memories are baggage, and I was traveling light. When every shared moment was selected, I pressed the trash can icon. Delete 178 items? The phone asked. I confirmed. They vanished. Not from my memory, but from my future. The room was now sterile, stripped of my plans, my history. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. I needed a new sound. I opened my podcast app and searched for ocean waves. I found a 10-hour recording of a calm tide rolling onto a pebble beach. I put my phone on the nightstand and turned the volume up. The gentle, rhythmic crash and pull of the water filled the space. This was not the sound of his yacht. This was not the sound of Aurelia Cove. This was the sound of a shoreline I had not yet seen, the sound of my own private ocean of freedom. I stood in the center of the room and took one last look around. The binder was in the suitcase. The evidence boards were blank. The computer was closed. I slipped on my jacket, picked up my case, and walked to the door. I pulled the key card from my pocket and laid it gently on the console table by the exit, right next to the room key I would leave at the front desk. My work here was finished. I called for a car service from the lobby. When the black sedan pulled up, the driver, a man with a kind, tired face, took my single, small bag and put it in the trunk. He held the door open for me. As I settled into the cool leather of the back seat, he got in and adjusted his mirror. "Where to, miss?" he asked. I looked out the window, at the gray sky, at the anonymous buildings of Rookford. The question was vast, terrifying, and exhilarating. I had no address. I had no destination. I only had a direction. Away. "The airport," I said. Then I added, my voice quiet but firm, "Anywhere he isn't." He just nodded, as if it were the most normal request in the world, and pulled out into the stream of traffic. On my lap, my phone screen lit up. A notification. 26 missed calls from Nolan Pierce. I stared at his name, a relic from a buried civilization. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pain. I felt nothing at all. He was a closed file, a locked archive. I swiped down from the top of the screen and pressed the small icon of an airplane. The cellular and Wi-Fi bars vanished, replaced by the symbol of my ascent. I was going offline. I had switched my phone to airplane mode long before the plane was scheduled to leave the ground. The air in the terminal at Gate B12 was thick with the scent of burnt coffee and the damp wool smell of rain-soaked coats. Outside the massive plate glass windows, a steady drizzle slicked the tarmac, blurring the runway lights into long watercolor streaks. The automated, disembodied voice of the airport announced boarding for a flight to Dallas, then one to Chicago, a monotonous litany of departures and destinations. It was a place of limbo, of people caught between where they had been and where they were going. I was no exception. I found a hard plastic seat near the window and watched the ground crew move like ghosts in their reflective yellow gear. Their movements slow and deliberate in the rain. I was running on adrenaline and caffeine, a strange, hollowed-out calm settling over me. The storm was over. I was just a piece of debris being washed out to sea. And then I saw her. She was sitting 3 rows ahead of me, huddled in on herself, trying to be invisible. It was Celine. The jade-green silk blouse was gone, replaced by a simple gray sweater that looked worn and tired. Her hair, so perfectly styled at the meeting, was pulled back in a messy knot. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, her face stripped of its victorious makeup, revealing a pale, blotchy exhaustion. Beside her on the floor was not a designer carry-on, but a scuffed, older model suitcase, the kind you buy from a discount store. The leather was peeling at the corners. The yacht was gone. The dream was over. This was the reality that was left. She must have felt my gaze, because her head lifted, and her eyes scanned the waiting area, finally locking with mine. For a moment, she just stared, a deer caught in the headlights of a future she never anticipated. Then, with a visible effort, she stood up and walked towards me. her steps hesitant, uncertain. She was no longer the confident rival. She was a supplicant. She stopped in front of my chair, wringing her hands, unable to meet my eyes. "Mara," she began, her voice a hoarse whisper. Nolan called me. He's a mess. He said, he told me to find you, to ask you, to beg you, not to send the full files to the state authorities. He says he can fix this with the board if it just stays internal." I looked at her, at this woman who had so smugly texted me about building empires just a day before. She was his last desperate gambit, another tool to be used and discarded. I felt a profound, weary sense of pity. Not for her, but for the pathetic nature of his final move. He still thought he could negotiate his way out of a fact. "It's too late," I said, my voice flat, holding no triumph, no malice. It was a simple statement of procedural reality. They received the complete, unredacted file at 10:15 this morning. The words hit her with a physical force. She swayed slightly, her hand reaching out to the back of a nearby chair to steady herself. She finally looked at me, her eyes wide with a dawning horror that had nothing to do with corporate governance. It was the horror of realizing she had backed a losing horse, and that the horse was now going to be shot. She swallowed hard, her throat clicking. "He told me I was just a tool," she said, the words barely audible over the boarding announcement for Phoenix. The confession was not for me, it was for herself. The first time the truth had been spoken aloud. He said I was a means to an end, that I was useful. I looked out the window at the rain, at a plane slowly taxiing towards the runway, its lights blinking in the gray twilight. "We all were," I said, my voice quiet. "We were all useful to him, until we decided to pull the plug ourselves. In that moment, we were not rivals, we were not friends. We were two separate data points in the long, predictable history of Nolan Pierce's collateral damage. The only difference was that I had written my own exit strategy. As if on cue, the bank of television screens mounted above the gate flickered. The local news preempted the scheduled programming. A breaking news banner flashed across the bottom of the screen. A serious-looking news anchor appeared. "We have breaking news from the financial sector. Blue Alder Capital has announced the immediate suspension of its vice president of the fund, Nolan Pierce, citing an ongoing investigation into what sources are calling gross fiduciary misconduct and the misappropriation of company funds." Nolan's corporate headshot, the same one from the company website, filled the screen. He looked confident, successful, a man on top of the world, a man who no longer existed. People throughout the gate area looked up, their conversations ceasing. They were strangers. But for a brief moment, they were all witnesses. They were watching the public broadcast of a private execution. Celine stared at the screen, transfixed, as if watching a ghost. She turned back to me, her face a mask of confusion and despair. The fight was gone, leaving only a hollowed-out wreck. What are you going to say to him?" she whispered, as if she still expected a phone call, a confrontation, another scene in a drama that had already ended. "Nothing," I said. And with that, the world shifted. A new voice, this one human and cheerful, came over the intercom. "We are now pleased to announce boarding for Flight 732, with non-stop service to..." The destination was a place I had never been, a name I had picked at random from the departure board. It didn't matter where it was. It only mattered that it was away. The gate agent unhooked the velvet rope. The door to the jet bridge swung open with a quiet whoosh. The line of passengers began to move, a slow, shuffling procession toward the future. It was my turn. I stood up and picked up my single, small suitcase. Celine didn't move. She was rooted to the spot, an island in the stream of people moving past her. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice small, lost. I looked at her one last time, a woman trapped in the wreckage, still asking questions about a story whose final chapter I had already written. "Somewhere I don't have to come back from," I said. I turned and walked towards the open door of the jet bridge, merging into the line of anonymous travelers. I didn't look back. I stepped into the enclosed tunnel, leaving behind the stale air of the terminal, the scent of rain on the carpet, and a story that I would never have to tell again. Seat 14A was a small, self-contained universe. The plastic of the window frame was scuffed with the marks of 1,000 previous journeys, a tiny history of departures and arrivals. Through the thick, multi-layered glass, the world outside was muted and gray. The rain had softened to a fine mist, and a single, watery ray of sunlight managed to pierce the heavy cloud cover. It cut a sharp, pale yellow line across the metal of the wing, a sliver of light that seemed to be stitching the boundary between my old life and whatever came next. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, feeling the faint vibration of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit, a low, steady hum that was the only sound in my head. My phone, still in airplane mode, lay screen up on my lap. I had no desire to connect to the airport Wi-Fi. No need to see the fallout, the news articles, the inevitable digital storm, but I had forgotten to close the last message thread. Before I had gone offline, a final text from Nolan had come through. It was still there, a ghost on the screen. 4 words. The final, pathetic salvo from a man whose arsenal was empty. You destroyed my future. I looked at the message, at the cold, black letters on the white background. There was no question mark, no exclamation point, just a flat, dead statement. He had cast himself as the victim, and me as the villain. It was the last, most predictable move in his playbook. He had built a career, a life, on a foundation of lies, and when the structure finally collapsed under the weight of its own fraud, he blamed the person who had pointed out the cracks. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were a geologist observing a seismic event. The destruction was his own creation. I had simply been the one to document the tectonic shifts. I left the message marked as read. There would be no reply. My silence was the only answer he would ever get. Just below his message was another notification, this one from my personal email, downloaded in the brief moments before I had severed my connection to the world. It was an automated reply from the State Securities Commission. The subject line was clinical, devoid of all human drama. Confirmation of receipt of submitted complaint. In the body of the email was a reference number, a long anonymous string of letters and numbers, and beside it, the case file identifier I had created, now an official part of the public record. Freedom One Way. It was done. The mechanism I had set in motion was now in the hands of a power far greater than the Blue Alder Board. The door was not just closed, it was barred, locked, and sealed by the federal government. A flight attendant, her movements crisp and efficient, walked down the aisle, her smile a polite, practiced mask. She paused at my row, checked the overhead bin, and then moved to the main cabin door. She pulled it inward, a heavy, solid piece of the fuselage. With a coordinated turn and push, she sealed it into place. The mechanism engaged with a deep, resonant thunk. It was not a loud sound, but it was the most final sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a vault being locked, the sound of a world being shut out, the sound of a tomb being sealed. The ambient noise of the terminal was gone, replaced by the hushed, recycled air of the cabin and the rising whine of the engines preparing for pushback. We were now a self-contained vessel, disconnected from the Earth. The plane began to move, a slow, lumbering reverse from the gate, then a turn, and a steady crawl toward the runway. I kept my gaze fixed out the window. The terminal, with its frantic, unseen dramas and its tired, transient souls, slid away. The rain-slicked tarmac unspooled beneath us. I watched the sprawling, indifferent architecture of the Rookford cityscape recede, the glass and steel towers shrinking, losing their power, their sharp lines blurring into a gray, indistinct mass. Nolan, Celine, Blue Awn, Alder Capital. They were all down there, becoming smaller and smaller, until they were nothing more than insignificant pixels in a vast, fading photograph. I was watching my past shrink to a manageable size, something I could hold in the palm of my hand and then let go. I reached into the seat pocket in front of me and pulled out the new journal and the pen. I opened it to the first clean, lined page. The paper smelled faintly of ink and possibility. I thought for a moment about what to write. What grand statement or profound observation could possibly capture the enormity of the moment? But there was nothing grand to say. There was only a simple, quiet truth that had taken me 31 years to understand. I uncapped the pen and wrote a single line, the only line that mattered. Freedom is not a destination, it's a decision. The engines roared to life, a deafening, all-consuming crescendo that vibrated through the very bones of the aircraft. The plane surged forward, pressing me back into my seat, faster and faster. The runway lights became a solid, streaming blur, and then, a sudden, weightless feeling, a lightness. The violent rumbling of the wheels on the pavement ceased, replaced by a smooth, powerful ascent. The plane had lifted off the runway. My heart, my soul, my entire being felt as if it had done the same. It was the feeling of a balance sheet that has finally been cleared of all its toxic assets, all its negative equity. The numbers were gone. All that was left was a clean, single line, reading 0, a starting point. There was no soaring, heroic soundtrack playing in my head. There was no tearful embrace waiting for me at an arrival gate. There was only the steady, powerful roar of the engines and the sound of the wind rushing over the wings, a sound of pure, unadulterated motion. My freedom wasn't a celebration. It was a quiet, solitary state of being. We broke through the cloud cover. The oppressive gray blanket that had smothered the city suddenly vanished, and the cabin was flooded with a brilliant, blinding sunlight. Below us was a vast white ocean of clouds, and above us, a sky of impossible, infinite blue. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. A small, genuine smile touched my lips, the first in what felt like a lifetime. It was a smile of profound, crystalline irony. They had wanted to make me jealous. They had wanted an emotional reaction, a spectacle, a fight. They had wanted me to play their game. I chose to disappear instead. The end. Thank you to our awesome audience for listening to this story. We would love to connect with you. So please drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you're listening from and share your thoughts on Mara's Revenge. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel and smash that like button. And to help this story get heard by even more people, please consider supporting us by hitting the hype button. Your support means the world to us.